Good afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to be here as always and see so many friends and colleagues. Today we're going to talk about sustaining and enhancing the S-92 platform. This time last year when I was here, I said that my aim for today was to not be talking about supply chain issues in the rotorcraft market. So I came up with an innovative solution, which was I changed the name of the panel. So success for me, great. I'm here with Jen from Martone, who's Program Director for Commercial Sustainment in Sikorsky. She's responsible for the commercial aftermarket portfolio. That goes across the full gambit of services, so from offshore VIP, search and rescue, utility, and Jen is also responsible for the Total Assurance Program, also known as PBH. So thanks very much for joining me, Jen, today.
Thank you.
I did pre-warn Jen that there's going to be no soft pitches in this discussion. So we're going to hit a very important one straight out of the gate, which is, are Sikorsky really committed to the commercial aviation sector? And can you give me 2 or 3 examples of recent developments that support that?
Sure. Sikorsky and Lockheed Martin, as our parent company, are deeply committed to the commercial market. Just to give you all the perspective, there's over 300 aircraft in the fleet of S-92. A large portion of that is the offshore environment, but there's also over 40 aircraft search and rescue throughout the world, as well as 13 different nations entrust the S-92 to lead their head of state missions for themselves. In all of those environments, Sikorsky recognizes the need to improve that platform to sustain for all of them. A couple of the things that we've got going on right now, many of you hopefully have heard, of our ongoing progress with the Phase 4 main gearbox. We've invested over $100 million to bring that to the market. Certification is coming on that this year. We're looking, from a versatility perspective on things like firefighting. We've heard that many times today, working with Milestone and our partner VIH on firefighting, as well as, we'll touch upon TAP. And we just signed an agreement into next decade on TAP. So, there's a lot more things going on, but those are the quick hitters, on big things Sikorsky and Lockheed Martin are doing, to show their commitment to the market.
Great. And we heard a lot of positive reaction on the recent announcement on the long-term support contract with Bristow. So if you can give us all the commercial details and the rates on that contract, that'd be great.
Sure, no problem.
Sorry, that's a joke.
Dinner tonight.
Yeah. No, can you tell us a bit about why that's an important agreement for the market, for the operator base on the S-92, and for Lockheed Martin Sikorsky?
Sure, really excited to continue our partnership with Bristow. It spans decades in the past, and looking forward that this goes into next decade. They operate, they're the largest operator of S-92 aircraft, with 60 in the fleet. The Total Assurance Program gives, from a Bristow perspective, it gives them, a known sustainment cost and eliminates or reduces those unplanned. But for the market itself, it gives us, known costs from our perspective for our supply base to be able to go back to our suppliers and show future growth and future hours on the aircraft. So we're really excited to bring that now back to our supply base.
Yeah, and to me, with such a large fleet, I think it really underpins the supportability of the 92 on a go-forward basis as well on TAP. So
it absolutely
very
does.
Positive.
It absolutely does. With Bristow being the largest operator, it sets the base. We do have several other TAP agreements that are under consideration as well. So looking to get all of those in place as well. Great
stuff. The Life Plus program seems to be kind of generating some tangible impacts now. The example I'd use is the upper housing credit, which was a recent good development and took some of the pressure out of the main gearbox supply chain issues. Can you tell us a bit about this methodology and how that long-term data from the fleet is used to sort of drive that cost reduction program?
Sure. So Life Plus takes our 2.4 now million flight hours of data. Many of the things that happen under Life Plus could not happen without that data that we have. You'll see pictures here of the Phase 4 main gearbox, and on the left-hand side, it's actually in our test. It's an actual 92 gearbox, the Phase 4 in Stratford right now. But Life Plus takes all of that data. It looks back at our predictive data when this aircraft was certified. And it compares actual data. Again, 2.4 million flight hours of data. Over 1 million of those flight hours are in some of the harshest environments in the world. And we take all that data, compare it to what we expected to see when the aircraft was certified. And now we can look that this aircraft is performing much better than we originally anticipated, and as such, can adjust those lives. We mentioned the credit on the upper housing. That's allowing that gearbox to stand an aircraft for an offshore operator at least a year longer, and some of our other operators, several years into the future. So the less times you have to take those parts off, the less opportunity for anything else to happen. So we're really excited for the credit. This has also culminated in almost doubling the life of the main rotor hub on the aircraft. All of these are smaller projects leading to the full Life Plus certification next year.
Great. And to me, these, the theme of really today's conversation is about how do you take an asset type and look at it over a long life cycle, and how do you continue to sustain and invest in that over that product life cycle. So I think the Life Plus program really is a real true demonstration of how you use that data to drive cost out of the support of the aircraft over time. Obviously, the certification program is fraught at times. We're one stage removed from it most of the time, apart from when James does some certification on fire tanks. But it feels to me that it's increasingly difficult in terms of certifying new helicopters. Even simple STCs at times seem to be very challenging. Do you think there's more we could ask as a user base from the regulators globally to drive transparency and consistency in their approach?
Well, I hope that everyone can look at what Sikorsky's done over the past 2 years in terms of transparency, and look at that as hopefully a model going forward. I think we've been nothing but open and honest. I've had a lot of not so fun conversations with my counterpart, especially over here. But we needed to do that. We needed, from a planning perspective, our operators needed to understand where Sikorsky was at in the build process, and in turn, our energy partners and our end users needed to understand the situation that was going on. I think that's the only way that that it works and that we can sustain going forward, is to keep that transparency. As much as possible. The one thing that we wanted to make sure was what we were doing was backed up with data, and was backed up that you can actually see it. We opened up our not only our facility in Stratford for many visits, but we also took our partners out to our supply base. To see it is to believe it, to know that those changes were happening. So I think, if anything that I've learned over the past 2 years is the transparency is the best avenue to make sure that we can all plan going forward. Yeah,
and I think if we can continue to encourage from the regulator perspective, a consistent approach across FAA, EASA, and globally harmonize a bit more than today, that would be beneficial for everyone, including everyone in this room from an investor base also.
Absolutely.
When we said we weren't going to spend too much time on supply chain, but we have to, a little bit.
It's the good time I get to talk about this. So
yeah, exactly. And look, I think there's been an awful lot of focus and effort on this across all the OEMs over the last couple of years. And that's not just exclusive to the rotorcraft market, that's also on the fixed wing side too. I think because of the size of the fleet and the previous history on the 92, it's been an unbelievably reliable platform over 20 years. I think maybe some of the Sikorsky supply chain challenges were reported and commented on to a larger degree than others with similar challenges. You've been at the front line of this and are pretty much uniquely placed to comment. Give us your thoughts on the supply chain status today, and some of the lessons that we all hopefully have learned along the way.
Sure, I do think, and our operators are seeing supply chain improvements. We're not 100% of the way there. But we are seeing, you can see the chart here, just on main gearboxes, which was probably the most painful of increases that we've seen. We've seen year over year increases. It can't happen overnight. The predominant part disruptions were from raw materials. Titanium was at an all-time low right after COVID, and trying to get with the drastic increases, and not only on the rotary wing but fixed wing side, it just drove, I'll say, chaos in the market from a titanium perspective. Getting that titanium into raw forgings, getting it to the machining, all that takes time. I'd say we're just living through those lead times right now, and now all of these parts are starting to come in. When you see 2 and 3x, original lead times, that definitely takes some time to overcome that, and we're seeing that come through right now. I'd also say that we have lived through a drastic change in the workforce. Particularly on our supply base. A lot of people left the market, retiring for the most part. And if you have a 30% change, of someone who's built this part for 20 and 30 years, it takes a little bit of time to get, new employees up to speed. We've seen that in the supply chain. We've seen it in our own environment. We've seen it, from the maintenance perspective for our operators as well. So that, it's one of those things where you can't flip a switch. It can't happen overnight. But we are seeing those improvements. We've also taken our data, through all this and improving the supply chain, taken the data and looked at what did we assume in the original predictive models and what can we see now? And those are the things like we've seen in Life Plus methodology. So doing extensions, also doing, when we talk about inspection intervals, looking at those, we've been able to extend, some of our shorter interval inspections, 375 hours to 500 hours, and 750 to 1,000. What does that mean? It seems like a small feat. What does that mean? It means over the course of that aircraft, our operators can eliminate almost an entire year of time by the required inspections. That doesn't even account for now we're looking at the longer inspections. So we're going to keep doing all these things to improve the maintainability and the reliability of the aircraft. But from a lessons learned perspective, I'd just say we've got to, look at the assumptions that are coming out of the market, focus on them, and quickly pivot, but not just pivot in one area, in multiple aspects.
Yeah, to me, I'd echo a lot of that. I think the two biggest lessons from my perspective are, the demand signals need to be clear and with, enough line of sight that people can make the right decisions. And I think expertise is very hard to replace in a quick manner. So we need to look at that very carefully, I think, as lessons that are key to learning from the supply chain stuff over the last couple of years. We've had pictures everywhere and videos of the S-92 being configured for secondary lives and secondary missions. Can you give us an OEM perspective on those programs over the last couple of years?
We're really excited about, the firefighting mission in particular, and hopefully many of you, if you were at Verticon, you saw that beautiful aircraft down there. Looking at what are those secondary markets for the S-92, we heard it earlier this morning about 30,000 hour life limit. To put that into perspective, a majority of our fleet, the average hours are less than 15,000 hours. We have 2.4 million flight hours of time on the aircraft. There's a lot of finance people in the room. I think you could do the math with 300 aircraft and only 2.4 million flight hours on that. So there's a significant amount of hours left on the fleet that's there. But that's not all going to happen in the offshore environment. So what are those opportunities? So we're really excited to work with Milestone and VH and whatever we can do from an aircraft platform to look at what those missions might be.
Yeah, and I think we hit on it earlier on one of the panels that we see the S-92 in that utility role as kind of complementary to the existing portfolio and bringing something a little bit unique to it too. So thanks to in particular my team and James for driving that from our side over the last couple of years.
I will say though, we also talked about that the 92s leaving the market. When we say more than half of them are less than 15,000 hours. Our estimates show less than a handful over the next 5 to 7 years will actually retire out of the market. So it's not a significantly huge number that people might be thinking. So we still want to look at secondary markets, but there's not a huge.
And by retire, you mean that hit their 30,000 limit that was mentioned earlier. So a long runway for a secondary mission potentially as well. I think you mentioned it already a little bit about the engineering team and the good work they're doing on trying to make sure that there's cost reduction initiatives going on. Mm-hmm. Again, this is just trying to manage cost over time on the platform. Mm-hmm. What are the recent developments? I think we've heard some about the scheduled inspections being enhanced or extended. Tell me the latest.
So we've completed the 500, 375 to 500, like I said, and 750 to 1,000. Our team works with our operators. We have a maintenance review steering group that meets twice a year. And the 1,500-hour inspection is a number one on the list in terms of extending. But that takes time. So they're looking through all of we have over 1,500 inspections of data to look at to see what we can do to optimize that 1,500-hour and push it to some number, ideally 2,000, but we've got to let the data prove that out. And we've also optimized different inspections that are in there as well, all in an effort, less touch time from a maintenance perspective on the aircraft. But we could only do this with having that data. So we've switched from that predictive modeling of what the aircraft we think will do to what the aircraft has actually done over that point in time. So I can't emphasize enough the value of the HUMS data that we've collected from the inception. It's a non-negotiable with the S-92s. It's a requirement when we sign up on all of our agreements with our operators that data comes back to us so that we can work at looking at these projects in an effort to reduce the total cost of ownership on the fleet. Great.
When we were talking about regulation, I think one that we didn't mention was how the regulatory environment and also, the IRGP sort of recommended practices talk to each other. How do you think about those from the S-92 perspective?
I think we're seeing a little, we're seeing a change, FAA versus EASA versus CAA, and then, the IOGP, standards. And we're working to make sure that the S-92 is compliant. From an IOGP 690, we have a fully compliant aircraft, and working to make sure, again, we maintain both FAA as well as EASA and those bilateral agreements worldwide to ensure this aircraft stays flying.
Yeah, and we were talking about it over dinner last night that, I think for the 690 perspective, having that standardization of the approach on equipment fits, et cetera, as well, so that aircraft can transition. Again, for an investor community, that's incredibly important that we're reducing that transition cost, and we've got harmonization of the required equipment and bringing, as we look at investing, to bring in new capabilities on the aircraft type over time as well.
Absolutely.
Great. I think I'm nearly done, but we might open it up for some questions. Okay, great. So the first one we have is, how many S-92 will have a positive business case related to Phase 4 MGB Life Plus program related to the life limit on 30,000 hours on the S-92? It's a lot in that.
That is a lot. The A Plus kit number one will be offered on new aircraft that will be delivered. And I failed to mention it before. We do have a lot of activity going on from a proposal perspective, not only in offshore but predominantly in head of state. And we're actually looking to close one in the near future on a head of state aircraft. So the Phase 4 gearbox will be on all new aircraft, but there is an opportunity, that the A Plus, it's a kit that can be offered on existing fleet. It's on a case-by-case basis. We've got to look at the life limit or the time left on the aircraft, what environment it's in, which how many, which customer it is, all those sorts of things will play into it. Which platforms are they going to? Those are all the different conversations that we have, that we go into and take into consideration when we're looking at, does it make sense to upgrade an existing aircraft to that A+.
I think we would think about it too, is that it's probably, the answer is it's not one size fits all.
Right.
It'll be a specific use case. It'll probably be, the newer serial number of the portfolio.
Sure.
So it'll very much depend on the specific requirement. Okay, I don't know if that's the only question, or we got some more.
How can Sikorsky support the S-92 supply chain during the nearly 10 years without new helicopter deliveries? So we have had new helicopter deliveries in 23, 24, and we do have a delivery in 25. They've been predominantly in the head of state realm. But also, when we look at over the past few years, we've returned over 40 aircraft to service. So aircraft that were, that were in storage, all came to fruition. So while we didn't have as many actual deliveries out the door of new aircraft, we've put 40 aircraft back to work that were not there. So a tremendous amount of volume and an increase. And all 40 of those aircraft needed a lot of parts. They definitely needed gearboxes. So some of those things are also really what contributed to the shortages that were out there. So a lot of activity from, I won't call it new, but returning aircraft to service over my time in this role.
Very good. I think that might be the last one.
That's it.
I'm going to just pick up on a point before we finish, Jen. So thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.
For joining me on the panel. Pat was mentioning earlier in his speech this morning around the importance of expertise in the platforms on the rotorcraft space in the lessors. I thought it was, and it got me thinking about, well, just for my own team, what does that look like? So over lunch, I was thinking about where they are, and these are the unsung heroes that are not in the room. Currently, they're in Saudi Arabia, Italy, Australia, London, USA, Malta, and France. So, having that technical competency in the team is an incredibly important part of the platform, and just want to say thank you to my team for all they do as part of that. So, thanks very much, Jen.
I'm looking forward to a boringly stable.
Boring stability, I think, was the phrase so far of Heli Investor. Yeah, exactly. Yes. Me too.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. More boring stability and the continuing story of the S-92. Thank you to Jennifer Martone from Sikorsky and Kieran Hannan from Milestone Aviation.